so I hope I don't end up tangling myself in here. Can people hear me okay? What is this thing on?
Yeah, that just records you for the computer. So Sarah Riche is a biologist, done a lot of work around the province in various aspects of things. She's actually one of the counters on my Boil bird count. And now she's going to give us some inside information on freshwater mussels in the province. So, Sarah?
Hello, everyone. I wanted to start my presentation on, this is my favorite slide. I wish I could get it as a tattoo or a t-shirt, because as easy as it is to love a face like that gorgeous little harp seal up there, tonight I'll be talking about one of the critters that tends to fall in the bottom half of that picture. The other 99% that isn't cute and cuddly, but definitely deserves so much of our love and respect. I actually am not a professional malacologist, unless the actual definition of a professional means you got paid to do it. I did once get to be paid to do a survey where I walked along a shoreline and picked up some mussel shells. So I don't know if that counts. But even if it doesn't, I am an enthusiastic amateur with malacology. Primarily, I am a birder and a herper. I dabble very enthusiastically as an amateur in dragonflies, damselflies, butterflies, and moths, and skippers, of course. But I wasn't actually introduced to freshwater mussels until I started working here at RBG, and I met one Mr. Paul Smith, wouldn't you know? So he is actually rather directly responsible for me standing up here today talking to you about mussels, because he's flicked an on switch about something I didn't know was something I could learn anything about. So freshwater mussels, I'm going to run over how amazing they are and how well or poorly they're doing here in Ontario and actually throughout North America. And I also wanted to give you the same information that was the type of info that Paul gave me, which is the types of things to look for in identifying them, which is the first step in helping them, because then the more, to me, once you learn how to identify something, that's the doorway to learning more about it. So the nerdy, geeky stuff out of the way, I promise this is the last time I'll try to spring any formal Latin on you. So they're in the phylum Mollusca, so they share the same area with guys like, snails and slugs and squid, octopus, etc. They're in the class bivalve, so the same with clams and fingernail clams, pea clams. The ones here in Ontario are actually all members of the Unionidae family, and everybody together, we're going to practice this one word, because there's 5 things I want you to be able to walk away from tonight, and one of them is being able to pronounce Unionidae. Bravo, Unionidae. You're all tasting that word now about just being able to say it again, aren't you? Unionidae. There are about 1,000 species of freshwater mussels in the world. North America has the highest biodiversity of those mussels at 300 species. Unfortunately, that is starting to decrease. I believe there's been about 21 species that have now been recorded as extinct in the US, and unfortunately ours are also headed towards that. So those of you who are birders, any birders in the audience? So if you are a birder, what about those of you who love mammals? Any mammal lovers? Any people who like to study guys like the dragonflies and the butterflies and the damselflies? Yeah, so I've ordered these taxon groups. Of course, I've neglected the bees and the flies and the things that there's just too many to count, and the beetles, etc. I've ordered these in the number, according to the highest number of species in Ontario and the lowest number. Reptiles and turtles, there are 26 species of reptiles that you can find in Ontario that are native. There are 26 species of amphibian that you can find in Ontario that are native. There's only 42 mussel species that you can find in Ontario. Those of you who are oh God, I couldn't possibly learn anything more. You know what? If you already know your birds, there's 270 species of birds that breed in Ontario. It would be 275, but I'm neglecting about 5 that haven't bred here in the last 20 years or so. And those of you who really know your butterflies and skippers, you already know more than there are mussels. You can learn the mussels of Ontario. There's only 42, the magic number, the answer to life, the universe, and everything. The meaning of life, 42. Technically 43 now, because Paul kept me up to date on a recent discovery that they found out this other rather cryptic species also occurs in Ontario that is not even included in the Freshwater Mussels of Ontario ID guide. It is that new, so officially now it's 43, but I can bump it back down to 42 because one of the species in the guide has only ever been recorded here once. So anyways, so magic number, there's only 42. You can learn them. I guarantee you all know the title and tune to more than 42 songs in your head, just off the top of your head right now. Now in Ontario, when it comes to, relatively speaking, as far as what proportion of the creatures here are in trouble, in Ontario there's 236 species that are listed at risk, and now those are just the ones that are listed in Ontario, mind you. I'm not including the ones that are listed federally. There are some that are listed in Ontario that are not considered at risk federally. There are some that are considered at risk federally that are not listed in Ontario. It's government language. Now, of those 236, 16 of them are listed as extirpated and that they no longer occur in Ontario, which means there are 220 species at risk that are listed as special concern, threatened, or endangered in Ontario right now. Now, of those species, reptiles are currently doing the worst when they're of the most conservation concern, in that the highest proportion of their groups are listed species at risk. Next worst are the freshwater mussels. Who here actually knew that before coming here today? Oh, of course, you guys, can you go and show off? So there's of course, and a lot of people will also pay attention to guys like the amphibians, the fish, mammals. A lot of people pay attention to the birds. The freshwater mussels are actually not doing nearly as well as the birds are. And one of those things that can help them out, one of the first steps towards helping them out, is knowing about them and knowing how you can help and learning how to identify them. Now in Ontario, we've got the 42, there's 55 total in Canada. So if any of you ever decide to travel to some of the other provinces and you're not going to be trespassing by doing so, feel free to wander along some freshwater watercourses and see what it is that washes up. Of the ones that are in Ontario, of the technically 43 if I count the one that was only ever recorded here once called the elephant ear somewhere up in the Ottawa area. Of the 15 that are actually ranked at risk, 10 of those are endangered, the majority of which are found in maybe only 1 or 2 waterways tops. The rest of them are either in decline or just not listed yet. So are they cryptic? Yes. Are they dull? If you don't look close enough. Are they ugly? God, no. They are actually really impressive. One mussel can filter up to 40 liters of water per day. And when I say filter, I mean it turns that into that. Who here is capable of intaking something from the world and then crapping out something cleaner? Anyone? Anyone? They don't technically crap out, better things, but they do remove things like bacteria and detritus and algae from the water. So they are natural filters. Now, the fancy way of saying how they are a great contributor to the ecosystem is that they remove large amounts of particles from the water column. They excrete those nutrients back into the water column, which benefits a lot of primary producers like aquatic plants. They biodeposit, i.e. poop, out their organic material to the sediment as feces, so poop, or pseudofeces, which is materials that they have filtered out but they didn't digest. And which, of course, that stimulates benthic productivity, which also increases the assemblages of benthic macroinvertebrates, or translation, they oxygenate and neutrify sediment, they transform carbon and nutrient, and that benefits other things, including ourselves. So if you wanted a quick summary of what I had just said, think of it in the capacity of this cartoon where you've got 3 little maid, cute little mussels that are just kind of sweeping up the bed and some fish looking on appreciatively. I want you all to look at this picture I took just this past summer from a area in the French River up by my parents' cottage. The riverbed is literally paved with freshwater mussels. That is a healthy watershed. I dare you all to guess where this picture was taken, with the very rare species in the top left corner of the barely visible beer bottle and bare mud and rock. That's here in Coots Paradise. Probably a lot better than it used to be 50 years ago, for sure. We've got a way. We want something a little closer to the picture on the right than we do the one on the left. And one of the ways that you can have a more stable area is lots of native biodiversity. It starts at home. You guys all live in a like a majority of you likely live in a watershed that eventually that water moves down towards Coots and Grindstone. So one of the ways to help take care of the watershed is if everybody does their part, plants native at home, increasing depth of roots with native species, increasing tree cover, increasing the amount of area that is not pavement. And that is something that helps to move areas towards the picture on the right rather than the one on the left. Another side note, when I moved in with my partner 2 years ago, he had nothing but a Norway maple and thistles in his backyard. Canada thistles, so not the nice native kind. And since I have planted, he had nothing showing up in his backyard, squirrels, the occasional robin. I have now planted over 50 native species in his backyard, shrubs, wildflowers, vines, 2 native trees, and a lot of ground cover. And the amount, just in the last 2 years alone, I've now been recording damselflies, dragonflies, we're not that close to water, and butterflies, loads more moths, other garden pests that are eating my squash, and loads more birds. So one way to help the wildlife, start with the plants. There we are. So they can actually be quite plain, or they can be very stripy. But all 3 of those examples, those are all the same species. There's just variation. Kind of like, well, humans, we vary quite a bit. Pigeons, horses, dogs, God, they all vary. That's mostly because we've been fidgeting with them. But you get variation within some species. And of course, there's other species that they stay true to form no matter their sex. Sorry, you next, sir? I'm sorry, I could hear part of that. I would not be able to answer that with certainty. I think it's probably not something you want to risk, considering the potential. There have been records of them surviving for several weeks in low temperatures when the humidity is high. So it could be maybe in that barn, maybe in a bilge section, maybe it just never fully froze. Who knows? And it's hard to say. I can't speak myself personally to the vigor of the larva, but I do know that they are deleterious to water bodies when entered, and there's no undoing it. So the safer thing to do is to not be one of those people that risks transmitting them to new places. And over here?
What's the dispersal of the adult mussel like? Do they vary around river currents? Do they stay put in their same spot?
So someone was just asking about the dispersal capabilities of the adults. So largely, once they have settled into an area, they can move some, maybe a few meters, if they suddenly get washed away in a massive flood event. Although a lot of the mussels actually, they have what are called abyssal threads that they use, or sometimes sort of mucus, that they help to kind of cement themselves in place so that they don't get accidentally washed away. I have come across a number of still alive mussels along shorelines that were a meter from where the water had receded to, and they were likely to die unless they were able to get back into the water, and it didn't seem to have been moving anywhere. You would think that, but without eyes, how was it able to know where the water is? I've seen mussel tracks actually in water, especially when I was up in the French River area and some of the sandy, silty areas. You could actually see the trails that the mussels were making in the sediment as they moved. There was even one that made a perfect symmetrical heart shape as it moved around. I wish I could find that photo for this presentation. They don't move a whole lot. They, generally speaking, barring any intervention from another creature or a wild, crazy flood event, they will stay in a relatively small area. Oh, another question? Yep. Not unlike you after a really rough night, the morning after. They have what's referred to as a foot. It's their adductor muscle or foot. They'll leach out a little bit of their muscle attached to something and then just pull themselves that way. And that is a sped up version of what you just saw. That might be 4 to 10 times faster than how they will actually move, but reach out a little bit. And it's It's not a graceful process by any means, but they are able to rearrange themselves in the water column if they do get disrupted. They actually tend to arrange themselves upstream to downstream so that the flow, they don't have to try to suck in stuff. It's just the flow of the water brings the oxygen and the detritus and food to them. So if you ever actually do happen to pick up a mussel and realize, oh crap, it's actually still alive, I thought it was dead, and you want to place it back in the water, you place it back hinge line down. So that hinge line, that's where it attaches. You want to place that end where it attaches down into the sediment, and that will help them rewrite themselves, because you don't want to just place them on the ground, because then a current could wash them away from where they were.
All the questions for the moment. If you have any more questions, Sarah will be around for a little bit. She's got the shells here. You can come out and look at.
Yes, I would love for you to come up and have a peek at some of these. There's ones in the boxes here, are species that were found right around here, around RBG, and then these other guys in the plastic cases are ones that were donated to RBG by I don't know who and I don't know where from. So, okay, excellent.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
This was fascinating.
Quite varied. They can drive. The love to answer them, or I could just keep talking about random cool things I found while I was out doing mussel surveys, but you would eventually want to stretch your legs. Yes? So you're asking if they have any predators? Yes, they do, actually. Muskrats love freshwater mussels, so do mink, so do raccoons. I don't want to hold it against them, because that's one of the roles that mussels serve in an ecosystem, is not only cleaning water, but also acting as a food source to other creatures. Now, and plus, the way that I like to survey by wandering along the shoreline, the only way that I know that something is there is if something has predated it, because they wandered through the shallows, pried it open, ate it, and left the shells on the shore. So yes, they in areas, of course, where there's otters love freshwater mussels too. I don't know how long it's been since otters were in the Hamilton area, but around here, largely they're likely being eaten by raccoons, mink, and muskrat. I would recommend against any of you guys eating them, though, by the way. Mussels are amazing. They are very long-lived, and things that are long-lived that live in the water can accumulate a lot of toxins. And there's even been some mussels that have been recorded to live to be almost 100 years old. Interestingly, you can actually check out their growth rings, and on some species, the growth rings are invisible on all species, but when you see there's these huge jumps of area between growth rings, and then the growth rings start to get very close together, that's how you know that mussel reached sexual maturity, because it stopped putting all of its energy into growth and started putting all of its energy into making babies. Yes? I couldn't speak to the biology of oysters or why it is that they're able to make, what's that, sorry? They're both mollusks, yes, but they're in different families. If you're interested in taxonomy, there's phylum, class, order, superfamily, a family, genus, species. It's I'd have to look at a family tree to find out exactly how closely related the freshwater mussels are to saltwater oysters. I do know the freshwater oysters taste better. I've never tasted a mussel, but I would guarantee they taste better than what we've got here. Yes? Breeding program, you mean like to supplement numbers? Yes. Okay, cool thing. Yes and no. So, and all I know is the brief bits of info that I've been exposed to from a trip when I was learning about mussels at the CCIW, the Canadian Centre for Inland Waters. And they've been breeding some in tanks, largely to study them, because despite there only being 42 species, there's still so little known about the species we have here. There are still species here that people haven't really figured out which their host species are yet. There's some that they're guessing. They're able to say, well, it might be any of these 5 species. We don't know for sure because nobody who's looking at them. And plus, where is the economic incentive into looking for them if people haven't really registered that, well, they're water filters, right? That's important. And people think, oh, we'll just, replace that with a Brita. We'll just put a whole bunch of Britas around a marsh. So at the CCIW, I got to walk in and check out their lab, and they've got loads and loads of buckets of different species, and they're sort of breeding them, but not to release them to boost numbers. It's in order to study their biology and figure out, what is their host fish species. They can find out sometimes with multiple tests, of course, but just because they're able to record that a Glaucidia was able to attach onto a fish, sometimes they're not always able to develop into a juvenile. Sometimes they'll attach and it's just the wrong species and that didn't work, and start from scratch. Some people have been concerned about that, like in areas where there are just so few mussels left, in places like Sydenham River, Maitland River, in the Thames, where the numbers are getting so abysmally small of so many of our species. And there's other people who are saying, well, some people are arguing against the validity of that, because if you haven't gotten rid of the reason why those species disappeared in the first place, reintroducing more, you're just sentencing them to the same fate as the ones that disappeared. But there are some circumstances where perhaps if the damage was caused by, say, a dam or dredging or a horrible pollution event like that, what was that pesticide burn back in was it 2007 or so, where there was a crap ton of pesticides that ended up in Spencer Creek? And maybe if there was something that was completely lost, then some people are advocating, well, what about replacement breeding for that? Which, again, though, if you don't know what was in the area in the first place, how do you know what to replace? Hint, hint, go out there and survey. Any other questions? Oh, yes? Oh, sorry. Sorry, you were right behind each other, so when I pointed to you, I think you can come next. Sorry, yes, sir?
Zebra mussels.
Yeah.
The name zebra, what resemblance does it have to a...
If anyone has any questions,